Good afternoon to everybody. I'm Rochelle de Kock. I'm the acting editor of the Herald newspaper. I'd like to just welcome each and every one of our panelists that are joining us this afternoon, as well as to all of you who are tuning in at home as the Herald and Nelson Mandela University's CanRed. Today we are hosting a very, very controversial, very important discussion, the meaning of transformation, practical perspectives from SA sport. As the Herald and Nelson Mandela University, we've had several of these discussions and dialogues before, some various topics that we've held discussions on. Some of them have been difficult, some of them have been uncomfortable, but all of them have been important. And today is no different. So I won't keep you. I'd just like to hand over to the facilitator who will be facilitating this discussion today. Her name is Nobubele Phuza from South Africa University Sport. Take it over.
Thank you so much, Rochelle, for that welcome. Yes, my name is Nobubele Phuza. I am the Secretary of University Sports South Africa and Netball. And I'm so glad that everyone could join us today as we discuss, as Rochelle has said, a tough topic, a thorny topic as well when it comes to transformation in society, South Africa in general. And also trying to locate where does sport fit into this discussion. We know that sport has a history of being used as almost the transformation example throughout South Africa, arguably since the 1995 World Cup. So we'll be trying to unpack then how do we look at transformation? What is the meaning of transformation? What are the markers of transformation? Using then some of the knowledges, the examples, the perspectives, and the experiences of the speakers we have today. So I advise everyone who's listening to please join the conversation through our chat section, and get involved, chat with us, please, and ask our speakers as many questions as you want based off of their discussion. As I said, we're joined by three panelists. We've got Mark Fredericks. Mark is a sport activist, and he has written extensively on the sporting history of South Africa. Transformation both in sport and transformation in general. He produced the video commentary Injury Time, The Rise of the 80-Minute Nation, and it was presented at the July 2011 Australian Society for Sports History Conference at the University of Queensland in Brisbane. Currently, he is a technician in photojournalism at Walter Sisulu University. So Mark will be looking forward to hearing some of those perspectives. I just want to introduce all our speakers. We've got to put Bantwini Matika as well, who is a well-known face in Port Elizabeth and in Eastern Cape rugby communities. He has served as the Deputy President for the Eastern Cape Province Rugby Union and a board member of Southern Kings. He's currently the Chairperson of the Rugby Transformation Coalition, the RTC. Then we have Coach Ashwell Prince, who's currently missing Port Elizabeth because he's all the way there in the Western Cape. He's an iconic South African batsman. I'm sure a lot of people know you. And a former Protea cricket player. He has played cricket at the highest level in all its formats. And in 2006, he became the first non-white player to captain the South African cricket team, where he served for 2 tests. Currently, he's the coach of the Cape Cobras in the Western Cape-based team. So we look forward to all of these inputs from our wonderful and experienced panel. I'm going to let the panel give us some opening views on this topic that we're going to be unpacking today. Mark, we'll start with you.
Let me unmute. Okay, thank you, Nobubele. I hope everyone can hear me well, clearly. This is an interesting topic, and I mean the way you prefaced it there, that sport has been the marker of transformation ever since 1995. Now, coincidentally, I've been working on something on transformation for a journal. Now, when South Africa's re-entry into international sport was being negotiated between the ANC and the nationalist government of F.W. de Klerk, one of the lead negotiators on the side of the liberators was Mr. Sam Ramsamy. And he said, let us normalize sport first. all else will follow. And here we are, almost 30 years, if not more than 30 years after that period, with 3 Rugby World Cup trophies, and having hosted several major international sporting events such as the 95 Rugby World Cup tournament, the 2003 ICC Cricket World Cup, and the 2010 FIFA Soccer World Cup tournament. In between, we've had numerous other international matches. The regular Tri-Nations Rugby and the Rugby Championship takes place every year. And we are still talking about transformation. You know, the 2019 Rugby World Cup tournament was a great success with the first, let me say it here, with the first ethnic Black African South African Springbok captain at the helm of the Springbok team. Now, Siya Kolisi thus epitomizes South Africa's transition from apartheid into adjectivism. His position as captain of South Africa's sporting crown jewel has to be explained by way of very explicit adjectives, so as to emphasize the strides the country has made in moving away from apartheid into a blanket acceptance of race as neo-biology. His national captaincy as captain of the Springboks, first ethnic Black African South African, also wipes away the history of those captains denied by the very system whose sporting symbol was the Springbok. Is that the transformation we're talking about, you know? So we have to then ask about what is this transformation we're striving for. And I think in order for us to answer that question and to contextualize South Africa's fixation with transformation in sport, we have to consider that the national question about race and racism has never been settled. Race has a manipulative importance in every conversation in South Africa, and sport is but one area. And when we refer to transformation, it should be very clear what we are talking about. We are referring to the cosmetic appearance of a structure, not the radical changing of its ideology. And in order for us to address this question of sport, transformation in sport, it requires 2 things of South Africans, 2 very important things: honesty and the willingness to ask uncomfortable questions. Now, ironically, just as I was working on this piece, I was looking at the global Black Lives Matter movement, which kickstarted South Africa's own call in sport for transformation. Actually gained unstoppable momentum during an unprecedented period in South Africa's human history, where no sport was being played at any level anywhere. And it is in sport where Black lives have particular value. Globally speaking, 43 of the richest top 50 NBA players in the US are Black. And the Forbes list of top earners in sport, the Forbes list of global top earners in sport, indicate that 46 of the top 100 earners in sport are Black. What transformation are we looking for here? Now, I conducted this research visually in that I looked at the list and I counted the dark pictures. Let's put it that way, because racism is a visual disease. And I am trying to find out what transformation are we talking about. Are we talking about radical transformation of the structure's ideology, or we are talking about changing the way it looks? So we got to also look that it is within this top tier of sport that calls for transformation are strongest, because and yet it is at the top tier of sport that this detachment from reality is almost total. And by detachment from reality, I'm referring to the historical detachment and the implications thereof. It is almost universally accepted that Blacks love soccer and whites love rugby in this country. You can go anywhere, that's what people say. This mantra seems to have almost mythical and holy power because it has been absorbed through the pores of our rugby heroes of all skin colors. And this is where transformation should begin. I made a few notes, so I'm almost done here. This is where transformation should begin, historically. The negotiations that were started by the ANC in the 1980s to free elite apartheid sport ensured that the legacies and structures of apartheid sporting institutions would survive and would be given free rein in the new South Africa. And this is not conspiracy or conjecture. This is historical fact. And these facts are not stored up in flashy super sport, chasing the sun type TV productions. These are facts that are stored in books and academic journals, dusty biographies, as well as very fragile repositories of human memory. The silent, neglected, and dismantled community systems cry for more than a space in an elite team. They cry for fear of their children being hit by stray bullets on their way to school, or the possibility of their children drowning in a pit latrine at another school. Now, when we look at transformation, are these the things that we are talking about? Are we talking about changing the way our national team looks because it makes us feel good? Or do we want to change the nature of our society so that we can also feel good, not only look good? You know, a team only makes you feel good for 80 minutes, depending, of course, on whether they win or not. So I believe that these are the crucial considerations that we should be taking into account when looking at transformation. And then we can return to the wisdom of Mr. Sam Ramsamy, who insisted that sport be normalized first. Is it possible to transform sport without transforming society? And what is that transformation going to entail? You know, we should focus our energies on returning to the teachings of very wise people such as I.B. Tabata and Neville Alexander, and become fierce radical activists for non-racialism, and move away from this new adjectivism of identity politics, which history has shown to have had disastrous consequences for societies. So in closing here, you know, I just want to add that if you look at how we look at transformation and the bitter taste it leaves, all its transformation and all its other little accessories, it shows that we have a fixation with race and differing levels of superiority and inferiority. So much so that Damien, the Springbok centre, Damien de Allende's father, thought it vital for the world to know that his son was part of the Springboks on merit, not because of some specialized equality. There was even several newspaper articles where Mr. de Allende insisted that his son was not colored, you know, for whatever reasons that may be, you know. So we have to ask, we have to turn our gaze to history and ask, why was it that the 1995 Rugby World Cup hero Joel Stransky said he was overjoyed when he heard that Nelson Mandela was going to be freed, because a liberated Mandela meant a liberated Springbok. And, you know, so how is it possible also in that same period that former anti-apartheid greats, our former SARU greats, have had to be honored with Springbok colors? They were found worthy to be honored with the Springbok color, but how many Springboks from the past could be honored in terms of non-racial struggle? Very few, if any. And where are they? So I just want to end off here that we can ask so many questions about transformation, but we just need to look at the living conditions of Springboks, such as Mr. Jack Lolomba and Sally Fredericks, and compare the living conditions of those two Springboks to that of their contemporaries, such as Frik du Preez and Hannes Marie. And that, I believe, is where our quest for transformation should begin. We cannot use the victims of a system to be the faces of legitimacy for that same system and then term it transformation.
Thank you so much, Mark, for that insight. And you've unpacked quite a lot. And I can tell from the number of questions that are coming through from the public and our audience around just your opening statement. And we're going to engage on some of those as we go. It's questions about who then counts as the ethnic Black South African, and what is normalized then around that slogan of no normal sport in an abnormal society. So we'll unpack that as the conversation continues. But let me hand over to Bantwini just to hear his opening remarks.
Thanks for the opportunity, Nobubele. Mark has really, in a comprehensive manner, put us into perspective in terms of the reflection on transformation generally, and in South Africa in particular in relation to sports. I think we need to be aware and recognize the fact that we happen within a society. As a society of South Africa, we are in transition. Some will call it transformation, change, but there's a movement that must happen from what historically we come from to where we envision to go in a non-racial, democratic, prosperous society. Now, if you look at the current status in our society, you see the huge divide, which is a legacy of the past where we are all compartmentalized. Now we were forced, if we look back in terms of transformation, we were very mechanical. We talked about quotas. When we talked about quotas, we were not mistaken because we knew there are gatekeepers who deliberately don't select players of a different color. So there was that tool. It was not a strategy, but it was one part of the mechanical interventions that we wanted. Hence, we were looking at color, how many black players, and all those things. And it was abused by the people who didn't want it. You also got people who would give it bad names. No one wanted now to be seen as a quota, including black players who came in the field and they excelled. But because of this negative tag from the detractors, because remember, we are talking about opportunities. So if you give opportunities to someone else and don't give to someone else, that was the tension which people tend to look at a negative aspect, that you are taking other kids' chances. So we now need to look and ensure have a broad approach in terms of transformation, because we have not looked into institutions. If you see currently the institutions, whether rugby or cricket, are now managed by black people, so to say. But if you look at the kind of output decisions taken there, you would swear that nothing has changed. But yet, as Mark has said, there are black faces there. You would expect, therefore, if there are black faces, they know why they are there. They know what is the agenda. That's the mistake we've made, to say people are going there, they know what we want and all that. So we folded our arms. We folded our arms and wait, and leaders will deliver for us. That's what we made. Our structures, no normal sport in an abnormal society. When we got into power, they all sat down. The comrades know what we expect. And now there was no watchdog in terms of ensuring that the transformation agenda fixes momentum and we move forward. So in that area, really, we need to look. So I want to emphasize institutional racism. That's one. Two, resource allocation becomes a very crucial issue. If you remember the way SARU started with the budget of development and all those things, because some of us or some of our leaders knew the issue here is development, it's equity. Now, in terms of equity, insofar as resource allocation, that's a big problem. A resource in the broader sense of the word, that's what we're talking about. It's a huge challenge. If you can bring it down and say, we managed to change leadership in these unions. We managed to bring some nice culture, some nice vibe in terms of hoping for the new South Africa. Then you've got a resistance which will express itself in pulling away your sponsorship. Look, border rugby, before we came in there, Mercedes-Benz was there. Everybody was working. But when we started to transform border rugby, and then the big business would run away, then that's what also you call now, that's another area that needs to be transformed, sponsorship landscape in South Africa. Whether the CEO of the company is black, but the thinking, the approach, the culture, it's still embedded in a long tradition that they usually have. So those for me are things that we need to look. Lastly, you also look at the institutions now, literally, whether your universities or schools. You look, for example, go at tertiary. where you would find this side you have a bastion of apartheid, Stellenbosch University, well-resourced and pushing the agenda of division and white supremacy. And then you had University of or University of the Western Cape as flag bearers of non-racialism. Until to this day, if you look at those resources in terms of the two universities, there's no way that these universities, historically black, can compete with Stellenbosch. Of course, we're moving in the bush, we're coming up okay. But the essence is we need resources. If we allocate resources properly, I am telling you, we would move forward. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bantwini, for that insight. And again, you know, the comments that are coming in from the audience are just echoing what you are saying. There's questions about, you know, leveling the playing field and how those type of resources that you're talking about need to be channeled into then the townships, into a rugby school, says Theo Peterson, that we need to have a rugby school in the townships, that Itembelihle is there, but no one is sponsoring these teams in the township. And we're going to come back to this discussion about institutional racism, and perhaps also question that the Black leaders you're talking about, Siya Kolisi, that Mark has already mentioned, are also inheriting that history of that institution. And there's a project of self-understanding that those institutions need to go under in order to understand the type of work that the Black leader needs to do coming in. So we'll unpack that a little bit more. Let me hand over to you, Coach Ashwell. Please give us your opening statements.
Yeah, good evening, Nobubele, and thank you to Mark and Bantwini for the opening statements. Is there anything left for me to say? I mean, it's all been covered. Look, I mean, I'm speaking predominantly from a former player's point of view, and obviously now from a coach's point of view. But also from a background of kind of growing up in apartheid and schooling during that time as well. Look, if I can just latch on to where Bantwini finished off there in terms of resources. For me, ultimately, you know, it's about opportunity. Ultimately, if we're gonna transform, you know, it's about opportunity. Who gets it? Who doesn't get it? And ultimately, it's got to be for the right reasons. So if you're getting the opportunity, it's got to be for the right reasons. And I think Bantwini also mentioned about current players or current and former Black players, you know, really unhappy with the label of the quota label. And it does have an effect on players. I think it's unfair on Black and any non-white player to have to carry, you know, that label. And we got to ask ourselves, you know, what is real transformation? And I think Mark touched on it a little bit. You know, if it's always just going to be a head count of how many different people from different ethnic groups is walking onto the field, then we're probably always going to have issues. For me, you know, if we really have to look deep into what it means, and it obviously is a discussion and a subject that has been discussed over and over and over, and I think it's really difficult to get to what an answer could be. But for me, there's a large majority of a nation that lived under oppression and have been oppressed by policies and legislations and indoctrination. And, you know, as Michael Holding so eloquently said before the start of the first test match in England this year, where he was a commentator, is that we have to re-educate society. You know, it can't be that everything that is related to a black person is bad, and everything that is related to a white person is great, because that's not reality. That's not how it is. You know what I'm saying? And so for me, there's a 90% of the population that's been oppressed. So as leaders, what are our jobs? My job is, as a coach now, as someone who's supposed to be identifying talent and creating opportunity, it's to do exactly that. So identify the value that people have, the skill level that they have, and to promote them on the back of exactly that. So can we rebuild the psyche? You know, that's something that's really important to me. Can we rebuild the psyche of the individual? Because let's face it, the psyche that we grew up with needs to change, or what they wanted to indoctrinate us with. If we're going to live our lives believing that, what are you really going to achieve? Can you really achieve if you're going to be living under that kind of psyche, where you were made to believe that because of a certain skin color, like Mark said before, because of a certain race, this is where you fit in, right at the top, middle, bottom, whatever the case may be. If we're going to continue to believe that, you know, then you got to ask yourself, really, what kind of belief does the person have that he can go out and make a success for himself? Now, yes, you need resources and you need opportunity, and part of transformation is that's got to happen. You know, young sports people, and I'm predominantly going to focus on sport, that young sports people need, for me, the way I look at it, it's that it's easy for decision makers or policy makers to think that they are transforming the sport, or a particular sport, or sport in general, by putting policy in place, i.e. quota policies. Because now when the team walks onto the field, like Mark says, it has a particular head count, and we can say that all demographics are being covered, you know. But is that really a transform? For me, how you transform a sport is programs. So to put programs in place is resources. So if you're a decision maker or a politician or whatever the case may be, and you want to make an impact in sport and you want to transform sport, you got to make sure that the resources get into the right areas. You got to make sure that we don't just go and put a facility down, because within the space of no time, the facility can be vandalized, or there could be no activity. So if you put a facility down, you're going to make sure that there's a program at that facility that can upskill the youth of the area. So then now, from the bottom up, and we keep saying we can't transform the sport from the top down by doing a head count for the Springboks or the Proteas or whatever sporting code it is. From the bottom up, you can put facilities in place, but you equip people running programs with those facilities. Then we can expect to see a genuine transformation of people going through the age groups from grassroots level to the top, and then hopefully we see a more representative South African team authentically transformed rather than policy transformed, you know, which obviously is creating a lot of problems within all of our sport clubs.
Thanks, Coach, for that. And I think you've reminded us of something so important as well about the authenticity of transformation. And maybe that's part of the discussion today as well, about what is that authentic transformation. We'll know that development players, and I'm calling them development players, simply because we just don't have new terminology to speak about Black players that have entered then into this elite level. But it's still so difficult for those players to be identified authentically without then these transformation imperatives being in place. There's also that burden of absolute excellence that Black players need to have. Makayandini once described it as a Black player, if you're trying to play within an elite level, you have to outperform all other Black players, outperform the white players, and also outperform your previous performance. So that kind of pressure for a Black player to be able to make it into those channels is also there. So we will unpack that. I just want to go quickly to the chat session where people are really just enjoying and taking in everything that is being said. Mark, if you can start us off here. There's a question in the chat section from Ulwazi, who's asking, who is or what is the authentic or ethnic South African? And I think that speaks as well to this conversation about non-racialism and how do we categorize who is Black, how Black are they? If you think about the EPG report and how it presents, there's a generic Black and then there's African Black. So when we're discussing transformation, what do we speak about? How do we use that terminology to describe the categories of Black people?
That's actually a very complex question, but it's also a very simple question. The interesting thing about the Eminent Persons Group and every single sporting federation in South Africa, they, in their annual reports and their transformation charters and what have you, then they commit themselves fully to a non-racial, democratic, non-sexist, democratic South Africa. That's what they commit themselves to. And then they go on to explain in detail the actual racial percentages of the people that they need in certain positions. Now, I feel that we are where we are because of flawed unity, a completely flawed unity process. And we need to go back to those guys who decided to dismantle the community structures prior to 1992, the unity of 1992. Because we have to not lose sight of the fact that elite apartheid sport tasted liberation in 1991 already, when Mandela himself couldn't even vote. So they were already walking onto the cricket pitches in India, Clive Rice and his friendship tour. John T. Rhodes became a worldwide phenomenon in 92 when he ran out Inzamam ul Haq. Not one of them were described as ethnic white South Africans or whatever. They were South African cricket players. Now that is where we need to get to. We need to get to a space where South Africans are South Africans. And I think that we are 50, 60, 70 years away from that point. We need to explain the position we are in now. Our unity was flawed. That's why the term quota and transformation and development have become ugly words, because it assumed that the apartheid structures were the superior structures, whereas the structures that they dismantled in the townships were actually the superior structures in terms of humanism. The very structures that Mr. Silas Nkanunu was part of. The people, Dan Keke, those were people that were part of those human structures, very human structures, who didn't play against coloureds or Indians or whatever. They played against that team. And I grew up in that culture where you were chastised by your rugby club or your cricket club if you used a term that described a person based on the colour of their skin, because your skin cannot think. Your skin cannot make a decision for you. Your skin is merely the covering that covers the person that you are. Now, we have moved so far away from that, learning that ideology, and we've now moved back into Verwoerd's 1950 Population Registration Act racial categories, which we are using in South Africa today, and the ANC's four-nation thesis of the different nations of Southern Africa. So I don't know if I'm answering the person's question here, but for me, a South African is a South African. I don't want to, and people must please not mistake what I'm saying for the nonsense that the DA is talking about now in terms of non-racialism. They don't know what non-racialism is. They've never listened or read about Ivy Tabata. I think if you ask Helen Ziller, who's Ivy Tabata, she won't know. So, and Dan Keke and these guys. So I hope I've at least tried to explain this youngster. He can send me a message on Facebook as well. I'll give him resources.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm sure that Londo will be back in the comment section to let us know if there's anything more that he still wants to expand on that question. But on the question of non-racialism, one of the Herald and Canrad digital series last week or a few weeks ago was about Black Lives Matter, and they discussed this topic of non-racialism at length with Prof. Crane Sudini, and I'm hoping that people will also go and tune in and have a listen to that. Yes. That will definitely deepen that discussion. But Bantwini, if we're going to remove then this idea of there's a black, there's a colored, there's an Indian, and there's a white person, how can we move in a positive direction on transformation without this raced state that we're trying to place ourselves in?
Yeah, it's again a very difficult question, but we really need to be pragmatic, because it's going to take us 50 years to transform society to be a society where everybody is equal to each other. That's education, and it's not a short-term thing when you want to intervene with education. Then the question becomes, are we supposed to wait for 50 years when everybody don't see anybody's color? No, because we're from a system that we want to change. We might have wrong intervention, wrong strategies, but we learn and go and move and correct. Hence the quota, and they rubbished it, and we bought into that somewhere that is called battle of ideas. Now, if we're going to listen to people who don't want us to achieve or enjoy the opportunities they've been enjoying for more than 100 years, then we're going nowhere. We don't listen, we close our ears, we march forward. As we move forward, we'll find the mistakes. For an example, Mark is correct. The flawed unity. I was a student then at Forte. I ran up and down when I come back to PE for clubs. I supported the thinking because Sasikhatuli is on Atipa effort, or Lincoln Mal, or McLean. They taught us this is unity. We've got to find a way now to go and compete. We're not free yet. It's 92, 93. And then the Afrikaner apartheid rugby. Remember Super 10, Super 10 or Super 12. They went in that competition with apartheid structures. Your Transvaal, Northern Transvaal. They were there representing us. And we were supposed to tolerate that. We tolerated it because we were told by the leaders, this is unity. We went to the township, put 5 clubs, good clubs. My club is Young Collegians. We had to come up and form Zwide United because these Burgis are so huge. We formed those teams, we went to the Burgis, yes. It's like we're wearing skater in Orlando, what is that thing? Skates, roller skates in the back. Big boys, big Grotmans. When they stick there with those Burgis, with that 5 team against 1 team, we were slaughtered. After 10, 15 years, we realized, no, man, this thing is wrong. Hence, Mark, go back to the basics. We're back now in the basics. But when we talk quotas of Springbok, we're not mad. When we talk quotas of Blue Bulls, we're not mad. They must transform. When I look on TV, look at the coaching box. I'm sorry, I want to see a white man, I want to see a colored, I want to see a black man. That's what I want to see when I watch. I want to see myself in that coaching box. I want to see myself and my community in that team. Now, flawed unit is fine. We talked up about development. When we talk transformation, people tell us about development. No, what developed? What developed? A child under 13 team, when that team is picked, a black child is called their development. And yet the whole thing is development. So now the tag, every black player or person is a development. Lastly, Varsity Cup, another racist competition that is perpetuating exclusivity amongst white players. Even there, when you want quotas, you are told, no, this is university. Okay, do it to USASA, to ASA, or not do it to the. But no, these boys come together from Craven Week, they come together from high school, they made the team. When they get to varsity, they disappear. We are not going to tolerate that. We're not going to tolerate that. So the bottom up must not stop us to want to achieve now. Bottom up is a continuous process. And hence I was saying we need 50 years to transform this society through education. There are no shortcuts, but we want opportunities for our black kids, girls and boys and white. They must all play together. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, indeed, there's definitely no shortcut to transformation. Long, winding road. I think Ashwell Desai even spoke about how it's a long walk to transformation as well. And arguably, we've been doing it even preceding democracy itself, discussing how to really transform. Coach, Bantwini is saying black players are transformed. There's no need for, or developed rather, and there's no need to be looking at black players and calling them developed players. And perhaps I want to argue and start bringing in this discussion about schools and the programs that schools need and communities. If you think about the journey of Siyakolisi, starting in the township and actually almost only excelling or being identified when he gets to grade. Same thing with Makayantini, managing to get to Dale, and that's when starting to identify and move into this elite space. How do we have a conversation about transformation when we see black players being plucked out of the township and brought into these well-resourced private or public schools that are actually doing the work of really bringing up this player? Can we still claim that as a development player, or did that player get there already developed?
It's an interesting question. I actually had a discussion. I'm going to switch to cricket if you don't mind. I had a discussion actually about a good friend of mine and a former teammate, Herschel Gibson. So when Herschel was about 12 or 13 or whatever, he was already one of the most talented sportsmen in various sport codes. He excelled in soccer, rugby, and cricket as a youngster. So then, by the time Herschel goes to Bishops, is it Bishops that developed him? Or is it Herschel? What I'm asking is, did Bishops do more for Herschel, or did he do more for them? By winning rugby matches for them, by winning cricket matches for them, by becoming a Craven Week player or whatever it was, and becoming a South African cricketer at a tender age. And so the accolades always tend to go to the school. And I'm not going to dispute that there wasn't any development that took place during those years, and that he didn't learn also on his journey, but he was head and shoulders above everybody else in his age group throughout the different sport codes as a youngster. So, where Herschel then hails from, that community or where he learned this sport, they never ever get any credit, so the school only gets the credit. Is that the only journey that a player has to undergo? As you just mentioned with Siyakolisi, now he went to Grey High School and obviously became Springbok captain. And so Grey obviously gets a lot of accolade, but that's not the case for every player. That hasn't been every player's journey. And some of us, including myself, but I want to talk about myself. Let's rather use somebody like a Vernon Philander. Let's talk about Vernon Philander. So he grew up in a colored community and played his sport there and went to school there and never went to any of the former Model C schools or private schools to learn the game of cricket. He learned it in his community, and so did many of us. And so, like Mark alluded to before, that community sporting program, do they ever get any credit for developing players who reach the top? Do they ever get any credit for the level of sport or sports people that they produce under apartheid? Never. Never ever did they get any credit for that. So my question is, it's not a question. I'm not taking anything away from the schooling system or the school structures. What I'm saying is, can we, alongside the school structures, produce another pathway to the top for young players from our communities? So something that runs parallel to the school structures. Because let's face it, if Grey High School has 2 or 3 bursaries a year for rugby players and 2 or 3 bursaries a year for cricket players, they're going to take 2 or 3 players. That's what they're going to do. They're going to take 2 or 3 players, and they're going to afford 2 or 3 players from our communities the chance to go there and an opportunity to make it to the top. But there are thousands left behind in our communities where we come from. Thousands with probably more skill than what I had, with possibly more skill than what Sia had, Tando Manana, whatever the case may be. We know because we grew up in those neighborhoods. We know the talents that exist there, and we know about the talents also that came before us in those neighborhoods. So my question is now, I live in Cape Town, so predominantly it's Bishops, Wynberg, Rondebosch, Sachs, whatever the case may be. I'm saying, hang on a minute, when I went to school, Sakos days again, and I represented EP in soccer and cricket and athletics, we used to go to annual tournaments. I'm talking about school tournaments, provincial tournaments, run by Sakos, whether it was primary school, SAPSA, which would have been South African Primary School Sports Association, or whether it high school, South African Senior School Sports Association. And in those, under the banner of Sakos, that we had these annual tournaments, and the skill level was immense. Now, there's no way that the Rondebosch, Bishops, Wynberg, Sachs, for instance, can absorb all of those players or those talents. So I'm asking myself, what about them then? Or their next generation of kids. I mean, because most of them will be my age now, so it's the next generation. Where's their next generation? Their kids have talent. I mean, these people were. I mean, I remember growing up with a great friend of mine, Eugene Mawlion. He also turned out playing first-class cricket for Western Province a bit, and he went up Northwest, whatever. But we met initially. I was running for EP, and he was running for Western Province. He was like 6'4" or 6'2" as a 16-year-old, and we met at the starting lineup of a 100-meter race. And at that time, he was running a time of 10.2 seconds. And that was also the end of my athletics career, because I was never going to run 10.2 seconds. But 10.2 seconds at the age of 16. And this wasn't the exception. There was loads of talented sports people like that. And I'm asking myself, well, not all of them can go to the Model C schools and affluent schools or whatever the case may be. So is it possible to produce another pipeline in all sports, from those grassroots communities all the way to the top, where eventually at some stage you can meet and have these trials and then get selected for the various representative teams. Another factor that is hugely important is that, and this is something that people who run programs at schools, they won't necessarily own up to, but we know, because we work in the systems, that there are numerous kids that go to these schools and they just do not fit into the culture of the school, right? They just don't fit in, and they don't excel. So you'll never hear of those stories, because those stories don't glorify the school's name. The only stories that glorify the school's name is the Siyakolisi stories. They glorify the school's name. So the other 20 or 30 who also went there and didn't fit in, and culturally it was a shock, and because let's face it, when you go there, are you allowed to be yourself, or do you have to kind of conform to how things are there? And so if you don't conform, are you a rebel? Are you a difficult person? So these are things culturally, these are kind of what we call the soft skills, the human touch things when we're dealing with athletes. Other than the I need you to score runs today, I need you to take wickets today, or I need you to have a man of the match performance today, score a try, score a goal to glorify the school's name. When these kids have difficulties in these schools, how much of a touch do they get? How much compassion do they get? Or is it just, we're giving you money to come here and you got to give us runs and wickets and tries and performances, or whatever the case may be? You know what I'm saying? That human element, I wonder, I can't sort of, speak for the schools. They're obviously not here to defend themselves also, but what I'm trying to say is that for every one story or success story, I would bet there's at least 10 sad stories of people, of things not turning out so good. So, listen, the question is a difficult one for parents. If you're from the township and one of these schools come knocking on the door, 9 times out of 10, you're going to say, this is the best thing for my child. I can't afford to pay for this education. I can't afford to pay for whatever the case may be. So 9 times out of 10, you're going to send your child. There's no ways you're going to deny your child an opportunity. But there are stories of people who find it very difficult socially in those schools.
Yeah, and you're mentioning even the public images of those schools and how they manage the PR around what was a success story and what wasn't a success story. You hear, I think it just came out recently that Grey is now the best performing sporting school of the decade, if I'm not mistaken. And it's no doubt also ascribed to the kind of successes that came with the legacy of Siya Kolisi. There's a question here that's leading us in a different direction, and it's from Isaac Shai. And Isaac Shai is asking, looking at sporting organizations, structures, and systems in place, one would note that certain racial groups were not meant to strive under the circumstances. So how do we go about changing those structures and systems in place without chasing away sponsors? Because resources, they bring resources. And this is pointing us in the direction of the commercialization of sport and the entertainment value of the industry, and how it can sometimes clash with certain transformation, the project of transformation that we're trying to bring in. Netball is also in that predicament right now. If we think about how most of the matches that are being publicized and spoken about and being sold to sponsors, those matches were won with a predominantly white team. So you have then this backlash from Black players that's asking for a different picture to be sold to sponsors. But where do we start the discussion on commercialization versus transformation versus the money that you need to save from sponsors? Bantwini, what are your takes on that?
That's another tricky one. I call it sponsorship racism. Take for an example, 2 big clubs in Eastern Province Rugby Union, Gardens, plays Progress. Come on. If you see the numbers, we knew that sponsors chases numbers. They want this to align the brand and they want the feed. ShopRite or Spar, sorry to call these shops, the feed from Gardens, the feed from Progress, they fill even the stadium. Why is it difficult that sponsorship should go and associate with that successful community when they gather there? It's a typical community club going to the basics, Mark. Those 2 clubs for me are the basic. Why do we have a club in the community? It's that glue. Progress does very well there. Gardens does very well. And I'm sure Young Colleges is going to have an exchange program. We're not go anywhere or go to other teams. We're going to Progress or Gardens to go and learn. That's what we must do now. Learnerships and exchange. 2, our kids, They are very good. The club townships, as I've told you about progress, and I told you about Gardens, it's the same in Zwede, Spring Rose, it's the same Bombas. The difference between those teams and Park, in Lawn Park, it's poverty. So in rugby, you don't need a poverty-stricken kid who doesn't have strong bones. Then nutrition becomes the issue. That's all. So, and I'm saying the kids are developed. Now, for the kids to get into the mainstream in commercial sport, I'm talking here about the Kings. If I take a player from Gardens and that player for minimum 6 months, stop working as a fitting antenna, give him a contract, this is what we are going to do now. For only 6 months, because they got everything, the skill and everything is there. It's just the conditioning now, because in that level, the space is too small than when you would find when player number one. So you need to condition the player to be able to take the hits. So really, there is no formula except that sponsorship is racist, and sponsorship see color, and sponsorship go to across the road and go and see a Lawn Park Rugby Club. They've got lots of sponsors there, small companies. But they don't do that in the townships and in the northern areas. Now, talking of taking kids out of their culture, it's also commercialization through the grades and what. We must see, going back to the basics, we must have hub in the northern areas because they are all close, the schools are there. We want a team there that go and beat grade unders, 6 unders, go and play with grades unders. The same thing you get from the township, you go and play another suburban schools. And then in that way, you retain your talent, they're close to their home, they know their environment, but they will change in a manner that they behave what is happening now because there's no mass participation in terms of program. So for me, commercialization, again, it's happening in a racist landscape of South Africa. There's no change about that. Those are the things that we need to push. We must fight for that. We must fight for that. If it means we go to Gardens, we ask Sanko, the civic, and say, we're not going to buy here. Because where are your sponsors? ShopRite was sponsoring big netball tournaments of white Afrikaner schools many years ago. ABSA, the same thing, boosted rugby in this country. When we came in the last 5 years, ABSA is pulling out. It's racism, and it must be addressed. And hence, this engagement of transformation, we must talk without fear, without faith. And we're not going to leave people who sit in treasury and departments allocation, our own people who seem not to care. Why must kings not get support from Eastern Cape government? That's sports tourism. And the whole leadership there is black. Some of them I know personally. They are black. They must have a good reason to say Kings is not going to go. We will bid 50 million a year. Because look at the contracts you get there. That's job creation. Minimum of 30 boys will earn 30,000 a month from the villages, from the township, from the northern areas. That's a big difference for families. So 50 million per annum for Kings is nothing than what they are busy doing. Now we must get them in PPEs and all those things. It can't be. So we're ready to fight. We're going to fight. Thank you.
Isaac Vile put Bantwini Sikville. There's just a host of comments that are agreeing with what Coach Ashwell was speaking about. And, you know, a lot of them are commenting around, a lot of people are commenting around this idea of community sport and creating this channel you were speaking about, Coach. I'm just going to mention the question, and I'm going to direct it to you, Mark, that Prof. Denise Zinn is actually mentioning. She's saying that what Ashwell is talking about is so important. In the days that school sport was organized under the SACOS banner, we did this without any sponsorship, but sport was organized. Teachers, schools, and local community clubs put in the time. They put in the interest of both the kids and the sport and the community. So having this pipeline is critical. The government as well as business should be ensuring that we build the nurseries, the nurseries across the whole country in all our schools to ensure equity of outcomes. and to learn from the organizational ethics of those community sports organizations and schools in the non-racial organizations of the 70s, of the 80s, and the early 90s. So the question here is, why can't we do this again? Mark?
Well, it's very simple. We can't do it again because our communities have been completely destroyed. I mean, we are fooling ourselves if we think that by transforming sport, we're going to transform society. It should be the other way around. Bantwini made a very clear point there now when he said the sports department, it's our people, but they're not giving us support, So it doesn't matter what the pigmentation is of the person in charge. If they have no culture of common interest, then they're going to look after themselves. So it doesn't matter what color we make the president of the country or the mayor of the city. If that person, if his mind is not directed towards community service, we're going nowhere. And that is where the honesty must come in. We can change colors like we want to. It's immaterial. We need to ask ourselves, what is our South African culture? How many of us here can answer that question? I'm looking at the panelists here now. There's 4 of us on screen. But where is Cricket South Africa? Where is the Department of Sport? Where is Rassie Erasmus? I've got tissues for him because I saw him crying on SuperSport when he was advertising his new Chasing the Sun TV series. Where are these people? Where's SA Rugby? Are we the only people concerned about what is happening in the country? You must remember that sport is only, it's only a very public face of what happens in society at large. And we are not here by accident. The person that asked the question that you directed towards Bantwini there about our communities that are not geared towards sport, that person has got a skewed idea of what history is about. I mean, here we're playing in the Currie Cup, and we actually want our players to play in the Currie Cup. But we've completely forgotten about the SA Cup, which Saru, the real Saru, not this mess we've got now, started playing in 1972, I think it was, when they binned the Rhodes Cup. I think the original Saru, the Sackers guys, we should actually sue for defamation of character, because this current Saru is a complete sham. It's a mess, So our communities have been completely destroyed, and you cannot have strong sports structures if you have destroyed the will. Or even the how shall I put it? The psyche or the morale of the teachers and the communities. I mean, in our day, we knew who the enemy was. We would not break a window at our school. We would not steal anything from our school. But now you put up a St. John's Road, a primary school just down the road here. It's over 100 years old, the school. They have had to spend, I don't know how many thousands now, replacing a fence that was taken down by community members during lockdown. So I think that is why we can't do that. We need we need communities to be reintroduced to the history of struggle in and through sport, because it wasn't only through sport. It was through other activities as well. And, I think because now what you have is you have history that is worthy and you have history that is unworthy. And at the moment we are glorifying one section of history that is only, it's only shining a tiny little torch, an LED light on one section of their history. And we have people scrambling over each other to make their children and their kids part of that system. Ashwell asked here, there's a knock on the door at somebody's home in the township, and that person has got a decision to make. Do I let my kid go to this grey high school or whatever? That is not the question. The question we should be asking ourselves as South Africans, why are we still having townships? Never mind the grey that is there. Why is there not a grey equivalent in KwaZulu or Mdansane or whatever? And those are the things we want to now shoehorn black pegs into green holes. And we think it's going to be transformation. It's not transformation. Change South African society. Let us change the way we relate to each other, and everything else will follow. Sport is but a small part of that, and I think those are the things that we need to return to. And I'm sorry, Bantwini, but it's going to take 50 years. It would have only taken maybe another 10 or 15 years, but we messed up the past 30 years. So we have to go for another 50. You might still be there. You'll be very old, but I don't think I'll be there.
We hope you'll be there, Mark, so you can write and reflect on this moment, and reflect on the comparison between these different eras that you've lived in. Coach, Mark and Bantwini are really speaking about some serious issues here on community development and the people and the resources that are needed for that kind of change to take place in that society, never mind the sport that's associated and takes place in there. What is the role of coaches then, and where do you see the place of that kind of leadership from excellent Black players that have played in Proteas and so on? Where do you see their role when it comes to transformation, and where their transformation or their efforts need to be focused?
So, Nobubele, I spoke before about oppression and people being oppressed. So this is exactly where I feel, the role of coaches are important. Bantwini spoke before about conditioning. Now, obviously, if you're going to be a rugby player, you need the nutrition because your body needs to develop. You need to be conditioned. In cricket, yes, you need conditioning. If you're going to be a bowler, definitely you're going to need conditioning. Let's look back at somebody like Mfuneko, obviously one of the most talented fast bowlers in our country, and the conditioning, physical conditioning was a problem because of nutrition. We spoke about, Bantwini spoke about, you need a strong bone structure, and I believe that, unfortunately that was the undoing of Mfuneko. But that is for me, that is one aspect, physical conditioning. The most important conditioning for me is the conditioning of the mind. And that is the most important thing. So for me, as a cricket player, I come from Galvandale in PE. I grew up playing the sport in the community. I was taught the game in the community. And then obviously, as I mentioned before, under the SACOS banner, we used to have our provincial tournaments, etc., etc. And then in my standard 9 and matric year, we had now the unity in the sport, as Mark pointed out. This was before even we had elections in the country. Nonetheless, there was unity in the sport, and now we were playing with the white players. And we had to compete with the white players to get into the provincial teams and the national teams. And ultimately, when I talk about conditioning of the mind, can we go back into our communities where we know the talent is there? We know it's there, right? Now, I would like to think we regard ourselves as former players, now coaches, been through the whole structures. We regard ourselves as the experts. If you regard yourself as an expert, you should be able to identify the talent. Identifying the talent, that's the easy part. And we all know that the talent is there, right? So that's the easy part, because we played the game for long enough, we know. Now, my thing is, can we go into our communities and condition the mind? What I mean by that is, if where you grow, where you live, and where you're growing up, if that tells you, even today still, because Mark just explained that those neighborhoods and those townships, they are just the same, if not worse, in terms of conditions compared to when we were growing up there. And so the psyche, I talk about the psyche all the time. If you're going to grow up believing that because I come from this township, or because I come from this neighborhood, I'm not going to be able to achieve X, Y, Z in my life because I'm at a disadvantage because of where I live. What I like to believe, or what I always believed as a player, And I kind of understood that I had a certain talent, whether that was in football or whether that was in cricket. I understood that I had a certain talent. And for me, all I ever needed was people, and I talk about people, the older generation, people to recognize that talent and give me one thing in life, and that is opportunity. Create opportunity for me. If you can create opportunity for me, I will prove what I can do. And so when I say about conditioning the mind, can we go back into our neighborhoods, into our townships, and say to the children, do you know what? We know that you have the talent, but we have to condition them that when the opportunity presents itself, and we are now in position where we can create those opportunities because we are coaches, we are selectors, we are captains, we are etc., etc. We are in positions of creating change. So we can provide those opportunities. But that player needs to be of the right mindset. And what I mean by that is, when I was growing up in Galvindale, I remember my father being a member of United Cricket Club in New Brighton. For 1 or 2 seasons, he played for United Cricket Club. And as a child, 9 or 10 years old, I used to go with my father to the matches on a Saturday, as you do. Next to the field, you play around there, you bat, you bowl, you be scorekeeper, whatever the case may be. Now, as a 9, 10-year-old, what I learned was that at United Cricket Club, Kaya Majola, Mongezi Majola, and Kadi, these are the 3 names that stand out for me. These were the star players, right? These were the star players. So my father, even though he had a lighter skin than them, as a 9 or 10-year-old, I learned that your skin color actually doesn't determine who's better. Because my father had a lighter skin color, these guys were darker players. They were Black African players, as we call them now, according to the EPG. They were Black African players, right? But they were better. They were better. So even though society told us that you got a slightly lighter skin, so you better, actually, when it comes to on the field, the only thing that matters is your skill versus my skill. That's the only thing that matters. And Mark spoke before about pigmentation. So this is what I learned as a 9 or 10-year-old, watching Kaya Majola and watching Mongezi Majola. And my father was a good cricketer, but he wasn't as good as them. And so when I became an adult and I had to compete against white people, this was my mentality. That just because you're white and you have a lighter skin than me, and because you have certain privileges and you have greener grass and you have X, Y, and Z, just because you have those things doesn't mean that you're going to be a better player than me. When we line up 22 yards away from each other, you standing there with the ball in hand, I'm standing on this side with the bat in hand, we've got to play man v man, and you got to show that you're better than me. Just because you come from a certain neighborhood that have more privileges, that have more greener grass, as I always say, just because you have that doesn't mean that you are going to be better than me. And you know what? If you do end up being better than me, then you are able to harness all your skill. When I talk about harnessing your skill, you are able to, as we talk in terms of professional sport, you are able to develop your technical ability, tactical ability. You are able to deal with situations better. If you are able to do that better than me, then fair play to you. But me as a player, I have equal opportunity to do the same things. And that's why I say about conditioning the mind. Let's face it, where we come from, and I know it's tough. I want to make no excuses, but you can play the game in the street and you can learn. You can play the game in your backyard and you can learn. You can play the game anywhere. You can create. You do not need the green grass. Let me tell you something. There are thousands of kids that go to all the privileged schools year in, year out, and their parents are able to provide them with all the equipment, all the extra coaching, because, I really get irritated when people say, oh, but their parents are able to pay for extra one-to-one coaching. So the point that I like to make is, can we not draw strength? Why can we not draw strength from the West Indies? When we talk about cricket, the West Indies of 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, do we believe that the West Indies of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, do we believe that they had better facilities, better equipment, better privileges than Australia, England, New Zealand? Yet they beat all of them, hands down. For 15 years, they were unbeaten in cricket, in series, away from home, home or away. So they didn't have any of the privileges, they didn't have any of the facilities, but they beat the world for 15 years non-stop. So what I'm talking about, mental conditioning, can we not go and find out from the West Indies, how did you do it? How did you do it? So part of the answer is they have athletic ability. We know that they had athletic ability. Do we have it in our townships? Of course we do. Of course we do, right? But they also had purpose. And this is the thing that's really important for me. They had a unifying purpose where they needed to prove to the world that a group of black people can do this better than anybody else. And the purpose wasn't, it was deeper than looking at the material things of oh, I need a new bat, I need a new this, give me an old scrappy bat, I'll show you I can do the job. Give me just, it's when you have deeper meaning, you can achieve anything. You know, and the West Indies story I can kind of relate to, because in our personal journeys, there was deeper meaning. There was deeper meaning in terms of going out and proving to the world that, you know what, I come from this neighborhood, I play cricket, or I grew up watching Kaya Majola, Mongezi Majola, and Stephen Dries, and the Bravo Jacobs of the world, Devdas Govinji. These were the people that you watched, you know, that you grew up watching and admiring. And you knew what talents and abilities there was. But all those people needed was an opportunity. And what I'm trying to say is, can we go back into our communities, identify the talent, and then can we walk the journey with the player? When I say walk the journey, we cannot just say, well, I'll pick you and you got a job to do in terms of you got to go score runs or score goals or score a try or whatever the case may be. It's a journey. It's a journey that player needs that support all the time, all the time, all the time. He needs that support. You know, it doesn't happen overnight. Sia Khaleesi went to Grey High at whatever age. He became Springbok captain at maybe 15 years later, or whatever, the 10, 15 years later. It's a journey, and it's support structures. Are we providing those support structures? When we're talking about Bantwini, talking there about sponsorship, you know, and unfortunately at the moment, let's be honest, we also need to be honest. Mark spoke before about honesty. Mark spoke about honesty. If we're getting the money, are we making sure that it goes to the structures, or is it going somewhere else? Are we making sure that the money is going into the structures, or is it going somewhere else? So when sponsors run away because of bad governance, then we must take ownership. When I say we, if we are sitting with the money and it's not getting to the structures where it's supposed to get to, then it's our own fault. Because people are not just going to keep giving money if it keeps getting lost, it's going missing. If it keeps getting missing, people are not going to keep giving money. So we also have to be honest as far as that is concerned. You know, if you want to get sponsorship, you got to make sure that your governance is spot on. And if your governance is not spot on, people are going to go, they're not going to sponsor money. They're not going to.
Thank you for that wholesome answer then, Coach. I think you've answered quite a lot of even some of the questions that are coming in and the comments as well. I know Udadukaya Matiso is saying that there's no contradiction between excellence and equity. If you are talented, you must get support and you will excel in your oppression, irrespective of your race. And then you also have Utabo Fanshai saying that SA winning the Rugby World Cup showed us that transformation works when it's done right. It's about equal opportunities, nothing else. So I think a lot of people are echoing and agreeing with some of the sentiments that you are sharing, Coach. I suppose the question that we need to also entertain, Mark, is about this project of self-understanding, which you started with in your opening statements as well. that the history that Coach is speaking about as well, that we need to learn from the history and understand all of the different paths that South Africa or any other country has traveled, especially where race is concerned. So my question then is, where do we start with that? If, as you say, many of the artifacts or much of that history is forgotten, lost, not spoken about, or there's also the conversation of how we need to leave politics out of sport. So how do we bring that project of self-understanding into sport with that history?
That is a complex question, but when people say you must leave politics out of sport, and I don't know where they're from, because why do they sing the national anthem before national matches? You have to start with history. But we covered so many things. We actually touched on this, because now when you look at sponsorship, you've got to remember. And I'll stick to rugby, specifically the crown jewel in our sporting crown, the Springbok. History and the Springbok are not good friends. So in order for us to understand where we are as a country, and we start to study the role of the anti-apartheid struggle through sport, then we will see that there are a couple of bullet holes in the Springboks' hide. The SACOS structure knew that sport was not only about sport. Hence their very powerful slogan, there can be no normal sport in an abnormal society. And if we just take a bit of time and think about where we are as a nation. Yesterday, the unemployment figures were released, and over this period, we lost 2.2 million jobs. So I know we are well under 10 million formally employed people in a country of 60 million people. So we are here talking about high-end sport. That is what it's all about. We want to give people opportunities in high-end sport where they can earn salaries in excess of maybe 50 grand upwards per month. I'm not sure what these high-end sports people earn, but we need to understand then why it was important for the road going forward that SACOS had to be destroyed. And we maybe need to call in that Nobel Peace Prize winner, F.W. de Klerk, and ask him why did he regard SACOS as the most dangerous organization in South Africa back in 1979 already, when he was Minister of Apartheid Sport. He regarded SACOS as the most dangerous organization in South Africa, and he actually said that it had to be destroyed. And then you follow those processes to see how they work together with the ANC to actually collapse community structures in sport, so that apartheid elite sport could then assume the mantle of leadership in taking sport forward. But you must remember that apartheid elite sport had no township structures. They had no interest in townships. And that is where our self-actualization and self-awareness in history should start. We want to actually be part of a structure that never had an interest in us from the get-go. Never, ever. What they want is they want to use, and that is why townships are still there. And that's why I say it transcends sport. It's way beyond sport. You can watch your television commercials from Volkswagen through to whatever television commercial. It uses black faces to promote the idea of universal success in South Africa. Any television commercial. And your sports commercials are particularly good at this, at showcasing black progress in a country where everybody is saying, yeah, but we're struggling. This is not true. So that is where our self-awareness should start. These are crucial questions that need to be asked, and we need to look at our maturity to decide whether we are mature enough to deal with the tough answers that are there. But once we understand what the sports struggle was about, the non-racial sports was about, then we will begin to understand why non-racialism poses such a huge danger to the broader capitalist project, not only in South Africa, but in the world, you know. And at present moment, coming back to Black Lives Matter, we are taking race relations advice from the worst country in the world, America, you know. So it's almost as if we've got no history in non-racial struggle, and yet it is here where non-racialism was actually formulated and unpacked by very brilliant minds in the struggle against capitalism and imperialism. And on this journey of self-understanding, we as South Africans will see that the history and the ideology, and I'm staying with the Springbok, I'm sorry to the Springbok fans out there, that the Springbok, the history and the ideology of the Springbok is wholly incompatible with the history and ideology of the struggle against racism through sport. In fact, if you just look at the year that they were established, the year that they got their name, 1906, their first tour to England, when Paul Roos was the captain, there was a player that played for England. He was their number 10, and he was from the West Indies. His name was James Peters, and his nickname was Darky, James Darky Peters, because he was of West Indian descent. And the Springboks, in one of I'm not sure if it was the first match or whatever, the team was called Devon County. The Springboks, Paul Roos, them refused to take the field against this team because they had a black fly-off, a black number 10. And there are other incidents where they went to France, where they encountered black players. And I mean, if you look at the captain of the French team, and which countries have inflicted more damage in Africa than actually the French and so on. I mean, they've, you know, the French and the Belgians. But can you imagine Bastereau, the captain, the former captain of the French team, being described as an ethnic black African, French, whatever. He's just the captain of the French team, and he's there because of his ability. So we need to return to history. And the unfortunate thing is, and I think everybody knows this, once we look at the history of how sporting unity was effected, a whole lot of pillars are going to start coming down.
Thank you for that, Mark. I'm just going to take some closing remarks from Bantwini and Coach Ashwell, and if we could do them in a minute and a half maximum, that would be great. I think we've touched on some really important things already, especially that part about community and resources and how those resources are allocated as such an important aspect that's coming out of the discussion. But if we could have your closing remarks, please, before we do the vote of thanks.
Thanks, Nobubele. We need to go back to the basic and the pragmatic. People like to talk about the future. I talk about now. As we speak in the Eastern Cape, I'm coming home now. In the Eastern Cape, whether we want to excel in cricket, netball, football, and rugby, we've got 4 universities. 4 universities here as pillars. Our schools, in terms of infrastructure, they are second to none. I'm talking now the so-called mainstream schools. I'm talking now. What we can produce with what we have now, we can stand against anyone in the world as Eastern Cape. That's why it's worrying me, the question of resources. Because those resources, if you've got 25 schools in a township, the resources do not allow you to build all of them. Why don't you identify? Why don't you identify? So for me, if you can use these blocks that we have, I can see now time I'm being okay. This topic continues, the program continues. We will never find solutions. That's why you must address now and next year and 15 years ahead. I thank you.
Thanks so much, Bantwini. Coach?
Yeah, look, the topic is a really difficult one. As we all said before, as a coach, and I'm gonna be brutally honest now, and a lot of people are not gonna like it what I have to say. But you know what? Unless we're honest, we're not gonna get any solutions. As a coach, I also have white players. I also have white players that play for me, and just as much as we don't want to see, you don't ever want what happened to our parents and to our brothers who may be a little bit older than us, who didn't get these opportunities. You don't ever want to see these type of things being repeated to anybody from any race. So I'm speaking from a coach who have black players, colored players, Indian players, white players. I would never ever want players not to get an opportunity in this country because they're not the right skin color. And this is where, if we want to move forward, we got to ask ourselves, what is in our hearts, what is in our minds? What is in our hearts and what is in our minds? And for our players from our communities, if you can start with the belief that you're not an inferior player or person because you're a darker or a different darker shade of skin color, you need to start with that. And then you can actually take out or be better than any player in the world, not just in South Africa, in the world. Because why? We've got situations or we've got examples of that right now. I mean, previous examples of Hashim Amla and Vernon Philander. Current examples, last night we saw KG Rabada doing his thing for Delhi in the IPL. The best bowler in the world, one of the best bowlers in the world right now. So it's not about just, I can be better than a white person in South Africa. We have people who can be the best in the world, in the whole world. So that's the talent that we have. But at the same time, as a coach, because listen, let's be honest here. I'm being honest as honest as I can. You build relationships with people. That's your job as a coach. You build relationships with people, and you build relationships with black, white, colored, Indian, everybody. And where I sit, I don't want, it's really difficult when we come from the past that we come from to have a situation where any person is denied opportunities because they're the wrong color. Still in 2020, you're not the right skin color. So whatever that skin color is, and let me just say something that I feel very strong about, and yeah, people say you're just outspoken and you're just a troublemaker and you're just a this and that. But can anybody explain to me how under apartheid, for instance, a person could not be white enough to get opportunities in sport? And then in today, as where we sit right now, you can be not black enough. So 30, 40 years ago, your father couldn't be white enough to get an opportunity to play. And then today, you could be not black enough to get an opportunity to play the game. And Mark spoke before about non-racialism and, when are we just going to be South African sportsmen, whether netball, cricket, rugby, whatever the case may be. It's really, really sad that you can sit with people not afforded an opportunity because they're not the right skin color. And that, we talk about how long is it going to take to fix itself. I really would like to live in a society one day, and Mark said 50 years, we'll be very old. Hopefully we'll still be I'd like to arrive in that situation while I'm still here. Nobody knows how many days we have left, where nobody in this country is denied opportunity because they are a certain skin color, whatever that skin color might be.
Thank you so much, Coach. Thank you so much to the panel. I think we haven't exhausted the discussion at all, but we can definitely take some of the points that have been raised here and continue the conversation. As Bantwini has said, on other platforms, continue the fight as well. I'm going to call up now Botsonabo Steerman from CanRed to do the final thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Nobu. Indeed, the conversation will continue even after this live conversation, but really, really a heated debate today. I am actually watching here with my family and some of my friends from the university, and the strong sentiment is that, you know, we simply watch sport on TV and we cheer, you know, our successful athletes, not knowing what our people are going through behind closed doors. So really, we really appreciate you guys to be bringing forward those nice insights, perspectives, and experiences. The likes of Ashwell Prince, you know, these are our icon as far as the cricket is concerned. Having them on these platforms, you know, we get to understand sport and we get to understand transformation better because they have been, you know, in the field and they know what the experience is. You know, Abu Babu Mark is our friend at CanRed as well. He writes extensively on this issue. You know, having him on the platform today, it was really, really insightful. And my friend from Apepai, Ubabu Bantwini, thank you so much, Ngokeli. Siyabulela kakhulu. To our audience, I see even today our audience was very diverse. You know, it's the beauty of having these webinars. We can reach, you know, up to the Western Cape, having Abu Isaac Shai, you know, from NNMU George campus, having Abu Pumla from Rhodes, you know, Abu Zimketa from Forte. We are really, really grateful to have such a diverse community. So siyabulela kakhulu, and also our Metro community for always supporting these webinars. And I always say, to buy a data and to watch a webinar for an hour and a half, we must acknowledge that, because we are not paying anyone for tuning in, but people are making sure that at least an hour and a half they are still with us. Lastly, to our organizing team, a Herald that is being led by Rochelle, Ubena behind closed doors, Trevor, our man, you know, on the camera, and Upila Kanu. We are really, really grateful to you guys. And to my team up at CanRed, because this is coordinated by CanRed on behalf of the Nelson Mandela University. So to my engagement team at CanRed, the Funuguti Ndiabulela Kakulu, and I'd like to close off with a dominant discourse that has emerged throughout this conversation, that we believe that there is no normal sport in an abnormal society. Thank you so much. Back to you, Nobu. And thanks to you, Nobu. You were amazing today. Thank you so much.
For those words. I think you've ended it off on the right note. So this is where we end our discussion then. So we'll be sharing the link afterwards on all our social media pages. You can follow the Herald, you can follow CanRed, and you can follow the speakers individually who are very active on social media.